Patrick Howley, senior reporter for National File. And Patrick, you just had this exclusive, which I'm really glad that you were willing to come on and talk about. This is interesting. Exclusive: Hollywood crew members reject vaccine mandates, plan to rebel against Biden-connected union leadership. I want you to tell me first off, how did you obtain this letter? And do you have it linked in here? Should I pull it up or?
Yes,
you do.
The whole letter is right in there. So basically, this was a source in Hollywood who sent this to me, wanted me to publicize this. This has been getting sent out by text message to every member of IATSE, which is the union representing the artisans, the technicians that actually make Hollywood work, not the big shots like Matt Damon with his terrible Boston accent and very phony Boston accent, I think, on Matt Damon. But these are the people who actually are below the line and who actually create what happens on the screen. And many people in Hollywood tell me that these people have a much more conservative and freedom-oriented bent than the Hollywood idols who just simply recite the propaganda that the Democrats want them to recite. So basically what's happening is this union is currently in negotiations as we speak with the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers over their new contract. So talks stalled for a while. One of the sticking points, one of the reasons that the talks stalled for a while is a dispute over the mandatory vaccine provision that is expected to go into this deal. There are a number of crew members now in IATSE, the union, that do not want this, that are rejecting this, and in fact are rebelling against this, pledging to hold up this vote, to block the approval of this contract, and also to vote against union leadership in all future elections if this union actually does mandate the vaccine. So just to give you a little bit of background about how politically tied in this union is, IATSE, the president is Matthew Loeb, and he recently wrote a letter to Joe Biden, we have that, volunteering the union and its members to work with the Biden White House in building field vaccination sites. So basically using all of the technical skill and the artistry that these people usually put toward Hollywood productions. Instead, the union, Matthew Loeb, is trying to get these people to work on field vaccination sites for the Biden White House. Obviously, IATSE is extremely tied in with Democrats. And so this is a situation where a lot of these technicians and artisans are very unhappy about this. And we will see if they end up having enough votes to be able to stop this contract from going into effect. But I know that there is substantial support for an anti-vaccine mandate movement within this union.
It's interesting because I was in SAG-AFTRA and a lot of my friends were in IATSE, mostly the photographers, the photojournalists, engineers, and people like that, like you described. Behind the scenes, people are usually in IATSE, though. Recently in TV news, as reporters have started to shoot their own video, now they'll have contracts with the station where like the next hire you have to put in, there's a reporter that shoots video like I was. You'll put that person in SAG-AFTRA, the one you hire after that you put in IATSE, after that you put in SAG-AFTRA, after that you put in IATSE. So it's kind of interesting as people are starting to have to do different things. 50 years ago or even just 10 years ago, the union said like, no, if you're in our union, you only do this one thing. It is kind of changing the composition, I think, of the way people, the demographics, I guess, of the particular unions. But as you described, it's true. I think people, generally speaking, in IATSE, and at least my experience in television news was that the people who would lean, I don't even know if it was necessarily more conservative, I guess you could say that, but they were just ideologically different than kind of that mainline, left-leaning way of thinking that a lot of people who are on screen or on camera think. They were different. They more like of a blue-collar, working-class type personality and just thought through, I think, some of political issues differently than the on-screen people. Now, I will say that I know people, like I've had Felix Montano, Hollywood actor, on the channel, and I know he knows people who are of his ilk, the SAG-AFTRA types, who are also would support what, this rebellion or whatever you want to call it. They would be like that too. But the problem is they feel like they would sacrifice their entire careers for that because of the visibility of, their job and going up against SAG-AFTRA, and that SAG-AFTRA is even worse than IATSE, that it would be near impossible to, to try to push back on the politics because of, I guess, the visibility of the people in SAG-AFTRA and then just the power of that union, and how linked it is in with, like you were saying, the political elites.
Well, absolutely. And what's very interesting about this story to me is that it cuts across the right versus left paradigm. Traditionally, the vaccine issue has not been a standard right versus left issue because there are many liberals and many people of all political persuasions who have always been resistant to vaccines, especially in my lifetime, as the vaccine schedule for children has just gone astronomically through the roof. And it doesn't seem like Big Pharma or the government has any intention of actually studying what the health effects of these vaccines are. So now that it's actually shoved in everybody's face and it's, hey, you need to get this jab or you're going to be fired from your job or you're not going to be allowed to be in polite society, I think it continues to cut across partisan lines. When you look at the freedom protests in Europe, for instance, where in Paris you had potentially millions of people in the streets against the vaccine passport, London, England, same kind of thing, Montreal, same kind of thing. And now we're finally starting to see that in the United States with the Oklahoma State Capitol protest this past weekend. You are beginning to see that it's not really a conservative versus liberal issue. It's an issue of, do you want to take this experimental injection into your body or not, regardless of what your political beliefs are. And so I think that the globalist establishment has overreached and overplayed their hand so significantly in this. And that includes not only the Democrats, but also establishment globalist Republicans and the Republican establishment, which is pushing this vaccine so hard. I think that there's going to be tremendous political backlash. And honestly, I think that the vaccine issue is something that could spark a political realignment, not only in this country, but all over the world, whereby it becomes more about the working people, the crew members, for instance, against people who are very much puppets of the system, the Matt Damons of the world.
So let's go back to your article real fast here and this letter. They make several arguments in this, not the least of which is that they don't want to participate in an experimental vaccine, that they are prepared and resolute in commitment to fully walk away from the industry if it goes down this dark path, is what they're calling, but could not in good conscience support a union or an industry promoting these human rights abuses. I'm curious, for the people who you've been in contact with, or I don't know if you had direct communication about sort of the behind the scenes stuff that's happening to put this letter together with your source. Are we talking like a big group of people who are thinking this way? Is this a small but mighty group of people? Like, what's your sense on not just, I guess, size, but also real level commitment? Because like I just read there, they're saying like, we're walking away from the industry if you do the opposite of what we're asking for here. You think that they're going to really do that?
Well, I know that these are pretty big power players within this union in the sense that these are veteran people. Nick Searcy, the actor and director, actually shared this article and said there are more of us in Hollywood than you thought. So this has definitely been getting around, and I was able to publish it and report it. And, I believe, based on what I know, that these people are longtime union members. It's a substantial, large group. And obviously, if they're making these sorts of negotiating demands and saying that they're going to walk away from the industry, then that provides some real clout. Hollywood cannot function unless you have these crew members. And I mean, if you look at the recent video of Tom Cruise ranting at crew members for not wearing their masks because the whole production might get shut down again, you begin to see the desperation of Hollywood. Hollywood is a capitalistic place, despite being extremely leftist in politics. It's capitalistic in the sense that they need to generate revenue. Executives get replaced. The Disney top executive was recently replaced because he didn't get as much money out of Star Wars as they were expecting, even though he got a massive amount of money out of it. So there is no job security in Hollywood at any kind of institutional level. And when you see productions getting shut down and when you see the Hollywood economy being affected the same way everybody else's economy is, it begins to puncture the bubble that exists around some of these Hollywood elites.
If you like wine or coffee or or both, here are two of my sponsors that help you support my work and have something great to drink while you watch my videos. The first is AllisonWinePromo.com, Allison with 1L winepromo.com. You get 50% off some of my favorite Argentinian Malbecs and 50% off shipping. One of these bottles comes from the third highest vineyard in the world. They use no flavoring or dyes, no filtering, and no excess chemicals. But if coffee is more your beat, then check out twinenginecoffee.com/Allison, twinenginecoffee.com/Allison. These are all Nicaraguan coffees. They keep many of the jobs local because they grow, select, roast, and package in Nicaragua. They are USDA certified organic, shade grown, and high altitude. So again, twinenginecoffee.com/Allison, AllisonWinePromo.com. Have a great glass of coffee, a great glass of wine, and support free speech, whatever you're drinking. So right here where it says that the following two items are required to earn a yes vote from all of us: complete rejection of any and all vaccine mandates, complete rejection of any and all vaccine status inquiries by employer. Note this specifically includes complete rejection of any visible marking of crew members with colored stickers or similar, incredibly violating, which I do believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe hearing that on sets and stuff, was there talk of this, or was this already happening when it comes to sharing status of medical history? Was that something that was already happening for people?
So as of right now, on a temporary basis, IATSE has allowed Hollywood studios to mandate the vaccine on set.
Okay, but are they, because I had heard, like for Amazon, for instance, I had heard talk about the sticker, like the sticker identification for vaccines.
Yeah.
Is that something that you had heard was like, in other words, are they concerned this is going to happen, or is this something that was already happening?
So it's already been happening on a temporary basis. It just wasn't written into the official contract that's being negotiated right now, which would be permanent. And so this has been a big thorn in the side of negotiators on both sides. Obviously, the studios and producers are pushing for this, and the union and the union leadership, Matthew Loeb, are obviously volunteering anything they need to Biden, even volunteering their own members to go build vaccination centers instead of movie sets. And so the union members are very concerned about this. So this is an example of rank and file union members standing up to the leadership of unions. Because if you look at the leadership of many unions all over the place, whether it's the Teamsters or any AFL-CIO, the teachers unions, the union leaders typically become political elites once they start going to Democrat fundraisers and parties and getting into the system. And then they lose touch with the people that they represent, their constituency, the same way that politicians do.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting to see the diversity of thought, because Hollywood often gets typecast and stereotyped monolithically as if everybody thinks the same way. And I try with my channel to talk about the variety of thought behind the scenes in the news business, that it may not be all what you think, but there's a power structure there that makes it very difficult for alternative thinking, and not the least of which is that, some of it's overt suppression, like you're not allowed to cover this, but others of it is sort of like, we just keep you in this hamster wheel where you're too busy trying to put out other kinds of fires, and you don't really have time to think through the insanity of like what your job is requiring you to do. It kind of sort of keeps you doped up intellectually, I guess. So I'm glad to see, just to learn whatever people think about this particular issue, that actually, in fact, Hollywood has quite a variety of perspective on this. And the main reason I think that's important for people to see is that Hollywood, and I feel like corporate media, politics, it all kind of, it's aligned, not just that the tech companies through which I will be broadcasting some of this video, are kind of aligned in their outspoken ideology. So I feel like the more that we hear about the dissent, the better, at least I hope, though it may be blocked from people, the better informed the average American will be about the nuances of how many people are thinking through this topic, and not just think that, it's only these kinds of people who are concerned about mandates. It's only these kinds of people, concerned about another particular topic, because I do feel like whether it's Hollywood, corporate media, the tech companies, the government, they love to frame it so that it's overly simplified in very falsified terms. Like, who is it that cares? It's just, I really do believe, because it keeps people divided, thinking it's just that simple because these people are just that stupid.
Well, this is also fascinating because this is cutting into the Democrats' power base. The Democrats' power base is Hollywood. Harvey Weinstein propped up the Democrat Party and propped up Hillary Clinton's political career for many years. And so, I mean, if they're losing support in Hollywood, if their contracts are being threatened in Hollywood, then that sends a big message about dissatisfaction with this current regime. And the other thing to realize, too, is that in the news business, especially, I've seen this, there's a lot of institutional pressure. There may be variety of viewpoints among people who want to be journalists, but that variety of viewpoint dissipates as the years go on, because the managing editors in corporate media are usually actually the least qualified journalistically to be in that position. The reason they're there is because they're glorified censors. They get the call from the donor. They get the call from perhaps the CIA. They get the call from somebody, on the red phone, and then, that article doesn't go through. Even having worked in right of center corporate media, I would see younger people come in and say, "Oh, I'm a conservative. I'm a freedom person. I want to change the mainstream media, stand up to it." As soon as they get a job at CNN or the Huffington Post, you look at them a year or two later, and they're like communist apparatchiks, and it's like, well, that that vapid careerism really drives a lot of the political ideology, but it all comes from top down.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. I do know some great news managers, but I think on average, whatever the industry is, the people who fail up, they I think in some cases enjoy the control of that position. And like a lot of those of us who are out in the field doing reporting, the reason we like doing that job is because we didn't want to have control over other people in the newsroom. At least that was what I liked about reporting. I started out as a producer. I really didn't like it because I really just didn't want to know what everybody else was doing and tell them, you got to take out this word. It wasn't fun for me. I like just doing my own thing, and I really want to control other people. And it does feel like, if you stuck me into that office, like you're like, here's all the money in the world, and we want, I would still hate it. Even if I could just get into it tomorrow, it wouldn't be fun for me because I just wouldn't enjoy being in that position. Now, I think you can approach it without, if you have some critical thinking skills, and you can see right now, like, what's going on with your own industry. But I've really lost a lot of, I don't know if I had the faith before, but I've certainly lost a lot of it in the last year or two in my peers' ability to see how concerted the information war really is right now. And because they've kind of taken on that tone of gatekeeper, of sort of disinformation warrior, now, even if you were somebody who was in you're in the control managerial position and you sort of had the ability, you're not really like trying to own the world. I feel like there's so much celebration right now about being in the position of again, like I said, disinformation warrior. And so now there's almost this moral crusading perspective to being in the news business when it comes to blocking information and keeping people from hearing different perspectives. And it's a very odd time to be like looking at my old industry and trying to understand how journalists are some of the loudest voices for censorship. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
No, almost completely. They are apparatchiks for censorship. These fact checker organs are completely dishonest. They lie. And, anytime there's an independent story that challenges what the regime wants to do in Washington, D.C., then these people swarm and they just make stuff up and pretend, oh, that's not true. But, the fact checkers are the worst journalists in the entire business. And so, obviously they work with Facebook in order to censor information, especially during coronavirus, because anything that's not approved by the CDC, they come after and they target. And meanwhile, we know that the CDC has admitted that people who had antibodies associated with the common cold were testing positive on PCR tests. Not to mention the fact that flu deaths went down astronomically, almost completely during the year 2020. People can see what's going on. Smart people can see what's going on. And I think that the majority of America is still smart enough to see it. And so the news industry has lost a massive massive amount of credibility since 2016 when they just became anti-Trump operatives. And when you have a president, no matter what you personally might think of him, who was extremely popular and continues to be extremely popular with at least half the country, you see the activism of the mainstream media almost defeating itself, because you're losing so many millions of people who just tune it all out now and say, oh, that's all garbage, I'm not going to even listen to it or pay attention to it. I think they overplayed their hand, and it was hubris. I really do.
Do you think that you would see IATSE members writing writing a letter like this to say, hey, we're not going to sign unless it got really, really bad? I mean, in other words, I guess your sense of their level of concern over this particular topic, because I guess just again, going back to my experience, you know, the union, I was forced to be in SAG-AFTRA. I really had no choice. But the amount of times that I wanted the headache of fighting SAG-AFTRA were like, I could count them on one hand, you know, because it's just like, I just want to do my job and finish up. And I just don't want to deal with this union because they've got attorneys that literally I pay for, right? And I'm forced to pay for. So to me, my read is that like, you got to be pretty concerned in order to want to go up against these people. Again, your dues pay for the attorneys that are supposed to be representing you. They may not be. You got to hire your own people. And so, like I said, it's just a headache sometimes dealing with the system. So I would say like these people are pretty concerned or pretty fired up in order to want to do this. Is that the sense you get too?
Yeah, and I mean, the vaccine mandate is a big deal. When you're talking about a needle, an experimental injection for this virus that many people, perhaps most people, are really not concerned about, certainly not nearly as concerned as the media propagandists are. I mean, you're not just talking about a political issue. You're not talking about carbon tax credits. You're not talking about tax rates. You're not talking about spending bills. You're talking about somebody coming by and putting a needle in your arm or even in your kid's arm. And now you see so much coercion to get children who are 12 years old or older to get the injection without parental approval. Now, knowing what I know about California, typically vaccines were not very popular there. Vaccines have become this staple of the Democrat agenda and, in recent years. But typically, a lot of the anti-vaccine sentiment came from California and came from more liberal places. And so, I honestly believe that the fact that the globalists are so concerned about getting people vaccinated, I think they picked the wrong issue, because they picked an issue that could actually spark a political realignment in this country. And I think that's going to happen.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I guess we'll see. Is there anything else that you would like to add before we go?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. And I believe that this is yet another case, though you may not like Hollywood, where, you see a big divide between populist people, working people, the people who pay for all of this, the people who pay for their massive spending on all their wars and their 20-year occupations and pay for all of this tyranny that's being leveled against them, not to mention pay for the mass immigration that many middle-class people of all races think in this country is actually replacing them. And I think that there is going to be a much bigger split, a much bigger divide between working people who generate income and pay for all of this, and the elites at the top. Many corporations don't pay any taxes. And I think that populism against the elites is really the split that's going to happen. I think Donald Trump basically broke that open. I think the way that Donald Trump's own Republican Party leaders betrayed him time and time again has angered many people against the entire establishment. And I think ultimately that's a good thing. It's not a good thing that they worked against Trump. It's a good thing that people are waking up to this, because if there's going to be an alternative to the political class, it's not going to come from the establishment of either the Republicans or the Democrats, either Ron Romney or Chuck Schumer at this point. And I think people get that now.
Okay, Patrick Howley, I'm going to put the link for your article in the description of the video so people can go check it out. National File. Thanks again.